Welcome to another episode of the Financial Armor Show. My name is Brad Cooper, president of Cooper Financial Investments, and your host. I want to welcome also my wonderful, amazing co-host, Tony Shore. How you doing today, Tony?
It's great to be here, Brad. I'm doing great. I've
Good.
had a really good week, busy, but got to spend some time with all three of my kids. My wife and I got together with the whole family, significant others. I love it when that happens. It's been happening a lot lately this summer because they've all had more time and just got together. We grilled some excellent steaks. I
Oh,
can't say enough about the meat that was cooked and the friendship and the fellowship. It was great. How about you? How have you been?
well, same thing, Tony. Past weekend, Father's Day, and
Yep.
just I'm starting to sound like my parents and grandparents, from years ago. You know what? We just are so excited when the whole family gets together, and
Yeah.
just seeing you kids is good enough. And my wife and I get that. Just to have our whole family around is just so,
It's the best
amazing.
gift we could get.
You're right.
Yeah.
I am jealous though a little bit, Tony, because one thing we could not do during Father's Day is barbecue or grill. Now we could have, but we wouldn't have needed a grill here in Arizona. I
Just the
could have just went
sidewalk.
out and just put a few steaks, prime rib on the sidewalks. It would have been done in 5 minutes.
Just wash off a spot on your driveway and just throw the
That's
meat
right.
down and listen to it sizzle. What's the temp right now?
Well, it's a beautiful dry heat temperature of 114 degrees. Now,
Wow.
let me tell you, folks, I'm from the Midwest,
Yeah.
and I don't mind heat. And there's no humidity, but 114 is like sticking your head in an oven
Yeah.
once it's got up to 500 degrees.
Yeah, an
And
oven is dry heat too, so that
yes,
doesn't
it
help,
is.
right? I mean, there's no humidity inside an oven typically,
But
but it's still too hot to spend any time in, right? That's
it
the
is.
point. Yeah.
We're in our wonderful, comfortable office. So thank God for air condition. And of
Oh,
course, I'm sipping on my ice
yeah.
cold iced tea.
Yes, iced tea, ice water, and iced tea, and air conditioning. That's the only way you get through. I don't know how people ever did it before air
I
conditioning. I
don't
mean,
either.
at 114, that's crazy right there.
It
Now
is.
you know how Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and the fiery furnace. You know the story, the
Yes,
Bible
I
story of
do.
the fiery furnace.
I,
Yeah, that story I think was based in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area.
that's right. That's,
I think
it
that's
could
where
never be hotter, even in an oven or
that's an
a
allegory. I think
cave.
it's just allegorical. It's like the fiery furnace, i.e., Phoenix,
Yes.
right?
But that makes sense, Tony, because we have Jesus down here and he was the fourth man in the fire. So,
Yeah, there you go. That's great. That's the good part of it.
oh,
I'll tell you what, we need armor against the heat, which is air conditioning, but we also need financial armor
yes.
to protect us against financial risk.
Right.
And I'm trying to segue here into our topic for today, which is mitigating longevity risk. What does that mean?
That's right. Here's a topic, Tony, that we have touched on off and on over the past couple years, which is a very serious risk is, longevity. We're living longer as Americans today. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's not so good. But, an article which I'm going to cover some of the highlights from Kiplinger was how to manage longevity risk in retirement. And the first point was we're living longer. The average life expectancy, Tony, to men is 79 and a half years, 82 for women. And one of the biggest fears, because we're living longer, is running out of money.
Yeah. Well, as I always say, the good news is we're living longer. The bad
Right.
news is we're living
We're living
longer.
longer.
Yeah. Right?
And we're going to touch on some of these topics on, yes, it's great at times, but at other times living longer, depending on your health and whether you're in a nursing home, assisted living, not so good and can be very costly when it comes to health and unforeseen healthcare expenses, which we both have a lot of firsthand experience with, unfortunately, with parents, in-laws. So,
So
But
longevity risk, when you talk about the risk of longevity, that's the risk of outliving your money. And so again, another phrase I like to throw out there is you don't want your bank account to hit zero before your blood pressure does.
love
Right?
it. So true.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the goal here, and that's why we talk about longevity risk. And I see it with my parents, and
Yes.
my grandfather lived to 101.
Wow.
Fortunately, he had income from the farm, but not everybody's
Right.
so fortunate like that. And so, my dad and mom, they didn't have a financial advisor, and my mom was always fearful of the stock market, so they didn't
Right.
have a lot saved up for retirement. And now they need now that they're in their 80s, healthcare costs are killing them. So you have to have a plan in place, don't you?
Absolutely. And that's another risk you just hit on is market risk. And that ties into the possibility of running out of money. You know, the average retiree in the United States today is one stock market crash away from detrimental, destroying their retirement plan
Wow.
because most people, Tony, I sit down with new people, and we're going through their brokerage accounts, their IRAs, their 401ks. And as a fiduciary, we have to take risk very serious.
Hmm.
And as we're doing an analysis of their brokerage accounts, what I have found over and over and over the last 20 plus years is people are taking way too much risk and they don't know what they don't know. And they don't know they're taking too much risk. I'll never forget years ago, I sat down with a couple. They were mid 70s. And I said, we got on the topic of risk. And there's usually 2 or 3 risk tests that we give to everyone we sit down with to identify their risk. Your risk, Tony, is different than mine. Everyone's risk tolerance is different. Well, I'll never forget, I looked at them and I asked, over the next 12 months, 24 months, what's the most you're willing to lose before you would feel uncomfortable and call me if I were your advisor? And the
Yikes.
wife looked at me, she started to turn red and said, 0. I said,
Right.
really? So, discussing, her past and her husband's past, they lost in '07, '08, '09 over, I think it was 60% loss, kind of
Wow.
destroyed their retirement plan back then.
Terrible.
So you can understand why she said 0. So, long story short, I took all their brokerage accounts and our team did an analysis. And I came back and she thought their portfolio, because it said, Tony, on every single page in the lower left hand corner, I'll never forget this. I'm not going to mention the company's name, large company, by the way, in the United States. It said low risk / conservative. Well, when our team did an analysis, we went back the last 2 to 3 stock market corrections and crashes, and we identified all the holdings that this couple had lost on average of 35% during those corrections. So I went back and I shared that information. After I shared that information, she turned another shade of red, a little bit darker. And she
Yikes.
said, Brad, we need to leave. I said, okay. She got up, went straight to their investment office that the representative worked at,
Hmm.
and found out that their definition of risk did not match the investment firm's definition of risk.
Mm.
And since its history, they moved their money over. So when we talk about running out of money, risk in the market can play a big, important role too as well.
Sure. Well, of course, it really does. And I know that that's why you take so much time getting to know your clients, and you have a questionnaire they fill out. You look at where they're at, and you talk to them and find out what
Right.
their personal risk tolerance is, because everybody's different. It's not going to be the same as your neighbor across the street, a friend at work, a coworker, or
Right.
someone at church. It's going to be your own personal risk tolerance, and your own situation is going to be different. It is going to be unique, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And, and another step and point to this article, it says estimate your personal timeline, understanding your likely lifespan. And we talk a lot about this, Tony. If you were in my office sitting next to me and the answers you'd hear from a lot of people I talk to, uh, just about a week ago, I met with a new couple and they said, Brad, I think they were 63 and 64 years of age.
Sure.
They said, we'll be dead by 70.
Oh,
So we want to take
oh
Social
no.
Security. We've already taken Social Security and we know we're going to be dead because my brother died, my sister died, my parents died, all before of age 65. So, that doesn't apply to everyone and that's no guarantee that they're going to die. So
Right.
let's
Yeah.
plan for the worst, but hope for the best.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Let's, but you also, it doesn't hurt to plan out a little further.
Yes.
And a lot of people I find, don't you find when you first meet with people before they become clients or work with you long term, I find that a lot of people, and I've heard a lot of people will say either one of two things. Oh, I'm going to live a long, long time.
Yes.
I don't need to worry about that. I'm going to live a long time. Or they say, I'm not going to live that long. I don't need to worry about saving for when I'm
Right.
80 or 90. I'm not going to live that long. It seems like they're one or the other where, the law of averages and reality is probably somewhere in between. So, I think it's better to plan far out and leave, maybe some for your loved ones,
Right.
rather than try to plan it so you bounce your last check, right?
And that is so true, Tony. And when I'm sitting down with couples, especially married couples who've been married for several years,
Hmm.
and usually one spouse will say, "Well, my lifespan's not as long," but another important factor to planning, and this is income planning, which that's what we do on a daily basis, is to make sure not only you as a couple, if you live to 100 years old or 115, it doesn't matter, you're never going to run out of money. But there was a study I read several years ago, I think it was in Fortune or Forbes magazine, that said that 77% of widows in the United States end up in poverty
Yeah.
because there was no income plan in place. And here, let me give you a reason why that is. You know, back many years ago, have you ever heard of pensions, Tony? You know,
A vague recollection. I do have a couple of family members who have worked for the
I know.
government, so I do know what a pension is, but they've gone the way of the pension, right?
You're right. I was just teasing there, but pensions, were pretty common years ago. So the reason why 77% of widows, this article talked about, fell in poverty once they lost their spouses, back when they retired. I'll just use this as an example. The husband was receiving a pension. When he set his options for payout, he chose single life, not joint survivorship, which means that when he dies, the money goes away. So picture this. I remember because I just met a couple several years ago. The husband was bringing in about 8,000 a month in pension, really good pension. Then Social Security on top of that was about 2,000 for him, 2,000 for his wife. So that was a total of 12,000 a month. So they're living good. But what happened was the husband died.
Mm.
And when he passed away, the pension was gone. Then that left two Social Security checks. So the widow ended up getting the higher of the two, which in this case, it was the same. So she ended up with $2,000 per month. So she went from 12,000 a month to 2,000 a month in income.
Wow.
So
That's
that's why
that's
it's
tough.
that's why it's
I
so
mean,
important. So when you're planning, that's a big factor. The problem I have with a lot of financial planners today in the United States is they base your plan, Tony, on your life expectancy. But what happens if, just like your grandfather who lives over 100 years of age? If I set you up a plan that you're going to run out of money at 79 and a half, Tony, because that's your life expectancy, and you live another 10 years and you're out of money, you're not going to like me too much.
No, no, nobody. That's the number one fear people have is running out of money in retirement. They fear it more than death, according to every study done.
Exactly.
That's
You know,
crazy.
just going through, a little bit more of the article, it says, focus more, which I get this, health and healthy habits, because as we get older, we realize that we're not going to live forever. And doing, the important things, exercising, eating healthy makes a big difference. Another thing, which I kind of highlighted because I disagreed with kind of what this point was in the article, it says, know your number. Most retirees now believe they need around $1.5 million to retire comfortably. It's a 15% increase from last year, outpacing inflation. The reason why I kind of disagree or don't like this point as much is because I have many, many, many clients that have less than a million, less than one half of
Right.
$1 million in investable assets to their name. But their pensions, their Social Security income, their rental income is over six figures a year that's going to last for the rest of their life.
Yeah. Yeah. So it all depends on your situation.
Right.
There's no one number, one size fits all. You got to know what your number is. And the only way you're going to be sure about that and you can have confidence and sleep well at night is by working with somebody like yourself and developing that written plan. And that's how you're going to help manage and mitigate that longevity risk is have a plan, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
You know, really the top risk today that, people are sharing with me, my clients and new people I'm meeting with. Number one, of course, is market risk. A lot has been going on this year, hasn't it? The first quarter this year was down because of all the tariffs. Now there's fear of war in the between Israel and Iran as we, speak today, and a lot going on in the world. So market risk is, a scare. But also another risk is running out of money, which we talked about. Another risk is taxes, which we talked about in the past. But, one thing which I'm happy, the same article with Kiplinger's, they talked about future long-term care cost. And we've talked a lot about that in the past, Tony, as far as that's not cheap, is it?
No.
And that's hit home personally. And this is a topic that we're really addressing very boldly and strongly with everyone we sit down with. And I'll tell you why. And I may have shared this a few shows ago. My mother-in-law's in an assisted living care facility. We had to bring my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, move them from Missouri to Arizona. They're an assisted living care facility. And that's not skilled. That's not memory. This is just assisted living care. And that's not cheap, by the way.
Right. It isn't.
Now, there are places that you could save a lot of money, but you got to be careful. Sometimes what you pay for is what you get. So you definitely want to have options. This study showed with 70% of people over 65 are likely to need long-term care, assisted living care. Again, 70% of the United States that's over 65 will sometime need long-term care, assisted living care. So are you prepared for that?
Yeah.
And I know your parents, Tony, I don't know if you had these conversations with your parents or they had them with you. Probably not back many years ago, because it seems like our parent generation, grandparent generation especially, did not talk about money too much.
No, especially, yeah. My mom a little bit, but my dad and his side of the family, you didn't talk about money at all. And
Right.
we didn't have discussions about these things before the fact. But as it started to happen, then all of a sudden, and you shouldn't wait. You shouldn't put it off. Communication is key. Talk about it with your family. And then we get into enhanced planning and things like that. And making sure you have powers of attorney in place. You've talked about that on previous shows, Brad. I know you're always talking about how important that is. But you're right. To mitigate longevity risk, you've got to have a plan in place to deal with long-term care. That's a big one. My mom it's $11,000 a month right now for my mom.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is
And she needs
expensive.
full and complete care. So, yeah.
That's about average too. The
Yep.
article talked about the average being almost $9,000 per month nationwide, and that's average. I've seen
Yeah.
places as high as 15,000 a month here in Arizona.
Yeah. Isn't it crazy? I mean, yeah, in memory care, when you have complete memory care and lockdown facilities, it can be 12, 15 for a nice private place. And yeah, that's really not good. So, what are some other things we should put in place to make sure we're ready to live longer in retirement? I mean, you talked about Social Security a little bit, but I think to reiterate, you have to maximize your Social Security, and you have a report you run for people you meet with, right?
Yes, Social Security maximization report, and just had this conversation last Thursday with a couple. When you're getting ready to decide on what options is best for you, when should I file? 62, 63, 67, 70. And again, the majority of Americans go to their family members or go to their coworkers or go to their neighbors and ask them what they did. This is a topic that is not a black and white, solution.
Right.
Everyone's situation's different. And good example of that is last Thursday. Normally, Tony, and we've talked about this before, when you're planning out Social Security, most of the time, the longer you wait, the more money you get.
Right.
Especially if you file at age 62, you're going to be taking a 25% reduction from waiting to full retirement age.
Yeah.
Then every year after full retirement age, it's an 8% increase up to age 70 to fully maximize your
Yeah.
monthly amount.
Yeah, it's
But
about 30% on both sides. I mean, you'll lose
right.
almost 30% if you file early at 62, and you'll be out another 30 if you, or you could gain an extra 30 if you wait till 70. So there's a lot of range in between there, different amounts. So everybody's going to be different, right?
Yes, and there's a lot of different factors to look at. Just the appointment I had last Thursday, which is not the norm, but I recommended, and our team recommended him to take Social Security at 62, Tony.
Hmm,
Why?
interesting.
He's got cancer. His
Ah,
life
yeah.
expectancy is 3 to 4 years.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a case for that.
Yep.
However, why should you wait? Or most people that we talk to, and most of our clients, which we advise to wait to a minimum of full retirement age. And most of them, even longer than that. Why? Because a lot of clients we're sitting down with to minimize future taxation risk, we're helping with the help of our CPA team do tax planning
Hmm.
and Roth conversions, shifting money from taxable to tax free. And when you're doing that, and if you file too early, there's a good likely most of your Social Security is going to be taxed. And there also could be some penalties if you're under the age of full retirement age.
Hmm. Interesting. So now another area, and we talked a bit about risk, but one way to mitigate risk, financial risk in general, let alone due to living longer or longevity risk, is to not have all your eggs in one basket, maybe not have everything at risk in the market. There are other options. You alluded to it earlier where, maybe some principal protected things, right?
That's right. And then this ties into, just your definition of risk. And
Sure.
I can tell you the majority of our clients have a balance. They have money in the stock market in professionally managed portfolios that have done very well the
For
last
growth.
10, 15 years for
Yep.
growth.
Yep.
But at the same time, we have a lot of what I like to call non-traditional strategies
Yeah.
that have principal guarantee protection. Number one, unlimited potential growth when the stock market's going up.
Yep.
And so with that mix, and sometimes it's 50-50, sometimes it's 60-40. It all depends
Sure.
on each person's individual risk tolerance.
Sure.
But by having that, when the stock market does take a dip of 20, 30%, you're not going to lose 30% of your entire portfolio. Versus if you have all your money in the stock market and the market drops 30%, you could lose 30% plus. And One thing I'll add to that is I just had this conversation again just here recently, and I'll use this just from memory. 2022, just what, 3 years ago,
Yep.
the portfolio my client had dropped 20%. Okay.
Wow.
It was a moderate risk portfolio. Keep in mind, it's done very well the last 15 years. One of the
Sure.
best performing portfolios we have. So negative 20. Here's the good news. In 2023, it did positive 20% overall. The third year, which is 2024, positive 20%. So Tony, I'll ask you, and I went back to my client and asked them this question. What was the average, do you think, over the last 3 years? With a negative 20, a positive 20, and a positive 20.
0.
Yes, almost. So my client was
Right.
thinking, well, I did 20 last year. I did 20 the year before, lost 20%. I should at least be averaging 10 to 12%. No, 2.8 to be exact.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and here's the reason why. You lose 20% of your portfolio, you need a greater return the following year to
Yeah.
recoup your loss. You need about a
Right.
30%
Yeah.
return.
Yeah. You got to make more. It's not just 20% to get back to 0. It's more
Exactly.
because it's
So
20% of what you had.
that's
Right.
right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's, something you really need to pay attention to and have a good balanced portfolio with different, which I call non-correlated assets, investments, which will make up at least 6 or 7 different types of, portfolios and investments. So when some go up, some may go down, you're zigging and zagging, but overall and over a time period, historically, you're going to be very happy with your returns.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's great, Brad. There are a lot of moving parts here, and it all starts with a plan. Working with an independent financial services professional like yourself, someone you can trust and is going to look out for your best interests, a fiduciary. And once you're working with that person, have a written plan, get together with them, and that's what you help people do. You're a specialist when it comes to retirement income planning, financial planning. So, how can our listeners out there, before we go today, let our listeners know how they can schedule that no charge, no obligation consultation with you and your team there, Brad?
Yes, Tony, feel free to call us directly, toll free, 888-390-5277. Again, that's 888-390-5277. Or visit our website if you have any questions, financialarmorshow.com. Again, financialarmorshow.com. And you'll see a lot more information. We have a lot of great resources, and you're going to see holistic financial planning very often on our site that addresses every risk that Tony and I talked about today.
Excellent. Well, Brad, great show today. An important topic. You did a great job explaining this to us and the importance of having a plan in place here and making sure you're mitigating longevity risk, especially now. Well, thanks for that. Listeners and viewers, thanks for tuning in. That does it for today's episode of Financial Armor Show with our host, Brad Cooper.
Thank you, Tony.